People have a lot of trust in society. For instance, you might think that Mother Teresa is one of the great humanitarian figures of last century without doing any research on your own, just by what society has told you, or just by what you've heard from people around you. Then what if I told you that, in reality, she was a liar and she did nothing of that? It would be very hard to believe it, right? Because everyone else says otherwise. Well, that's what happened to me learning that Napoleon Hill was a conman and one of the biggest scammers of all times. For those who don't know, Napoleon Hill is one of the biggest sources of inspiration for aspiring entrepreneurs and businessmen. He wrote probably the most successful ever business book, Think and Grow Rich, a book where he tells all that he learned while interviewing the 500 most successful businessmen of the US at the time. But in reality, he did none of that. Novak, an investigative journalist, took on the quest to shed truth over Napoleon Hill's real life in a piece published by his blog in Gizmodo, Paleo Future, a retro future blog. According to Novak, Napoleon Hill was a scammer and a great conman who is attributed success that he never achieved. But nowadays, his word is taken as a gospel for achieving success. The strongest proof, or better say lack of it, that Novak provides is how there is no records of Hill meeting Andrew Carnegie. As Novak says, I contacted Andrew Carnegie biographer David Naska about the alleged meeting between Carnegie and Hill, and he told me that he found no evidence of any sort that Carnegie and Hill ever met. Carnegie was the richest man of his time, and one that Hill claimed to have met and have conducted intense interviews with. Also, Hill claimed that Carnegie gave him the mission to interview all the other most successful people in the US to discover the secrets of success. Before diving into the issue even deeper, there are some things to take into account about the author, Matt Novak. First, it is easy to pick up the author's negative bias towards Napoleon, starting off from only the genre that he worked on. Matt considers self-help as get-rich-quick nonsense that Napoleon Hill would help popularize. Considering that myself, I have the same bias towards most self-help gurus, it was easy to tell. However, as my knowledge of Napoleon Hill was only from friends that have read his books, I had thought of him only as a documenting author rather than a self-announced guru. That's why going in, my expectations were not anything near that of learning that Napoleon Hill had been a self-help guru. But I could mitigate such bias while reading only for the reason that I saw it projected. The writer had the same bias as me, so I could at the same time examine my bias and the author's bias. However, after further research, even when the public has become aware of the deceitments of Hill, many argue that there is still a lot of value in his work, that such discovery does not make it less worth it. But it still remains highly questionable how valuable Hill's lessons are with what Novak brings into the table. Novak brings in proof that Hill has been punished for fraudulent business deals, faking checks, and setting up fake universities. Moreover, Novak brings in some very exploiting sides of Hill's character. At the time, Hill made use of the death of one of the best investigative journalists executed by organized crime to lift himself up and get one of his books published. Novak reasons why it doesn't make any sense that the journalist, called Mallet, could and would endorse Hill. As Novak says, as the editor of a struggling newspaper, second in the town of two newspapers, even if Mallet showed interest in Hill's writings, it's unlikely that Mallet had assembled $50,000 for the publication of some grand work by Hill. Mallet was far too busy antagonizing the local police and bush runners to go fundraising to get Hill's books published. On top of that, Novak digs deep into how it is impossible to find any proof of how Hill was an advisor to Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt, two United States presidents, and the proof that Hill himself claimed to have about being the advisor of these two men conveniently burned down. To add some more context regarding the background of Matt Novak, the author of the piece is a writer of the Gizmodo blog Paleo Future. His works are very interesting, as he usually writes on the genre of retro future that requires investigative, good skills and also very good analyzing skills. So the guy seems very fit to dig on people's pasts, a task he did for Hill in this piece. However, at the end of the article there is a correction. An earlier version of this article also misidentified the book by Norman Vincent Peale as Success Through a Positive Mental Attitude. That book was by Napoleon Hill. Peale's 1952 book is titled The Power of Positive Thinking. Making such mistake on such a thing as a book written by Hill poses more questions about the carefulness with which Novak might have chosen his sources. However, the conclusion of this non-fiction piece is that today Napoleon Hill's preachings have been adopted by many for various purposes. In the most major parts, his teaching inspired the whole movement of self-help, or some argue more like feel-good. His literature is still considered a must-read in many business circles and business schools, and has greatly affected proclaimed gurus such as Tony Robbins, Tai Lopez, etc. But that's what makes this investigative work by Matt Novak even more valuable today. His great use of investigative skills and facts that he finally discovered the ugly truth behind Napoleon Hill.